Okay, بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا بفضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. So we did the first section of this, and I just want to revisit a concept. So it said here in the beginning, it said that Ibn Umar, he had this concept of stressing a vow, right? And that's not a concept that exists for anybody else. So what we have to understand is that um, there are certain fatwa of the Sahaba and the Tabi'een that are what's called shadh. They're weird, that nobody else followed. So Sayyidina Umar has a fatwa, Sayyidina Ali has a fatwa, someone has a fatwa that's really strange, and nobody followed them in that. And then over time, by the next generation after that, the 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 more noticeable it is that nobody is following it, right? It's not like, for example, him and his teacher, his students and tutors agreed with it. Nobody agreed with it. And then it becomes what's called qawl shadh, right? Qawl shadh. So example of that is mut'a, right? So mut'a existed in the Meccan school of fiqh from Ibn Abbas and his students and students, and then it died out. So now you come along and say, well, there's no ijma' on mut'a, so therefore it's halal, right? Temporary marriage is halal because no ijma' on it. You say, well, hang on a minute. Did they not all agree thereafter, right? If it's not the time of Ibn Abbas, then the time of his students. What about his students? Like, wasn't there a time in history where everybody agreed that it was haram? The answer is yes. Okay, that's called ijma'. So this self-editing process is very important. Because if we don't have this self-editing process, then we have absolute pluralism. Absolute pluralism, meaning anything that is theoretically possible will at some time come up as an opinion and is now valid. So there's these two opposing systems. One system is the openness of the Quran and Sunnah and the fact that it could be understood in principle in many, many ways. And then there is this opposite process, which is the self-editing. Nobody else who followed your same, nobody else has agreed with you, or nobody else who's followed the same process of research has agreed with you. What does that mean? That means nobody else has agreed with you. That's huge. That means like nobody else, regardless of their methodology, agrees with you. Okay? And that means you're probably wrong. And therefore that position should not be followed, etc. Right? So for example, reading the Quran without wudu, it exists, right? Is it crystal clear in the hadith or anything that you can't recite Quran without you can't hold the mushaf without wudu? It's not crystal clear in the hadith. Could be understood in more than one way. In the Quran, it could be understood more than one way. But which Sahaba or Tabi'een said that you can touch the mushaf? Very few. And you go to the next generation, very, very few. And it gets to a point where no scholars hold that opinion. So therefore, it's considered shadh, and it's just there as not wrong, but should not be applied. Does that make sense? So we have a qawl shadh, where I'm not saying it's wrong, but I'm saying that's just like nobody else did that. Or very few people. And then you have a qawl that is weak, a position that is weak. No system has organized that, has agreed on that. So the Hanafis debate and they debate and they debate and they come to an answer. Okay? So they've come to an answer. But if the Hanafis do their job and the Shafis do their job and the Malikis and the Hanbalis, and then and none of those systems, independent systems, agree upon something, then that's a qawl that is weak. That's a position that is weak. Right? Like in the Shafi school, we say there's a weak position that if you touch your mum, it breaks your wudu. So that's a weak position. It's da'if. Meaning no madhab has done their whole process and discussion and come to that conclusion. That's considered weak, right? And then you have it's kind of something in between, and then the other extreme is reliable, right? A madhab or more than one madhab, they've come to that conclusion. There we go. So here, when he has this distinction between, oh, you do this if you emphasize it. This distinction and emphasize and non-emphasize. There's something that's unique and peculiar to Ibn Umar. Maybe one person agreed with him, but that's it. It stopped there, and we just leave it. That's a mistake that people make, and that's it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, great. So now we're on to um, now we are on to this section here. باب الرجل يحلف بالمشي إلى بيت الله. Right. So we mentioned last week. So it says a man who swears an oath to walk to the house of Allah. So we mentioned a distinction last week between an oath and a vow. A vow, you get something that Allah has asked you to do but not made it obligatory, and you raise it from the level of sunnah to wajib. Okay? Sunnah prayer becomes wajib through a vow. That's called a nadhar, it's called a vow. Versus a qasam is, I swear by Allah that happened. I swear by Allah that is the case. I swear by Allah X will happen. It is not a condition that it be obligatory. Right? And so you cannot make a vow of something haram. You could make an oath of something haram, right? And it's obligatory, obviously, to break that oath. By Allah, I will murder you, right? So now you're obliged to break the oath and you're obliged to expiate, right? So here's this question here. So it says, أخبرنا مالك أخبرنا عبد الله ابن أبي بكر عن عمته أنها حدثته عن جدته أنها كانت جعلت عليها مشيا إلى مسجد قباء فماتت ولم تقضه فأفتى ابن عباس ابنتها أن تمشي عنها. Right? So Malik informed us that Abdullah ibn Abi Bakr informed me from his paternal aunt that she narrated from his grandmother that she had made a vow, she had not vowed, she had made a oath that she would do this. But that she died without doing that. Ibn Abbas gave the judgment to her daughter that to walk in her place. أخبرنا مالك حدثنا عبد الله بن أبي حبيبة قال قلت لرجل وأنا حديث السن ليس على الرجل يقول علي المشي إلى بيت الله ولا يسمى نذرا شيء فقال الرجل هل لك إلى أن أعطيك هذا الجرو لجرو قثاء في يده وتقول علي مشي إلى بيت الله تعالى فقلت نعم فقلت له فمكثت حينا حتى عقلت فقيل لي إن عليك مشيا فجئت سعيد بن مسيب فسألت عن ذلك فقال عليك المشي فمشيت. So Malik informed us that Abdullah ibn Abi Habib narrated to us saying, I said to a man when I was young, there is nothing binding on a man who says, I must walk to the house of Allah, without calling it a vow. The man said, would you like me to give you a little thing? Referring to a small cucumber in his hand. They call it a puppy, Jaru, strange name. I don't know, some kind of small cucumber. If you say, I undertake to walk to the house of Allah, if you said, what is it? So I said, yes. I said it, and then I remained some time past until I came of age, reached puberty, and someone said to me, you have to walk now, you have to do it. So I went to Sa'id Musayyib and I asked him about it and said, yes, you do. So it seems like they are treating it. So here Imam Muhammad says, قال محمد وهذا نأخذ من جعل عليه المشي إلى بيت الله لازم المشي إن جعله نذرا أو غير نذر وقول أبي حنيفة والعامة من فقهائنا رحمه الله. So Imam Muhammad says, we adhere to this. Whoever makes an undertaking to walk to the house of Allah is obliged to walk. Whether he makes it a vow, he uses the word vow or not. And this is this is the view of our fuqaha in general. Right. So I believe in the Shafi school we have hmm, you have to say something like lillahi alayya. It is obligatory for the sake of Allah, not just alayya. Because he said, I have to do this. Right? He didn't say I have to do this for the sake of Allah. Wallahu alam. We can double check inshallah. But the default is a vow is I make this obligatory upon myself for the sake of Allah, not I have to do this. Right? Again, what about a promise to yourself in your head? That doesn't mean anything. Right? So a vow or an oath is something that has to be said. There's Babu man ja'ala ala nafsihi. Let me just quickly give me a second, please. Get my commentary. The Hanafis, seems like the Hanafis basically say that when you say I have to go to the house of Allah, it means it's understood that it's for the sake of Allah. The default is there's no vow there because you didn't say I'm doing it for the sake of Allah. You're just saying I have to do this. Allahu A'lam. Then it says somebody who undertakes. So let's say, imagine you said that lillahi alayya an a'tamira mashiyan, mashiyan bil aqdam. So I make it obligatory upon myself. He said, for example, I make it obligatory on myself for the sake of Allah to perform umrah while walking. Okay, and then you're not unable to do so. So assuming that it's valid, let's have a look here. So someone who undertakes to walk but is incapable. أخبرنا مالك عن عروة بن عذينة قال أنه قال خرجت مع جدة لي عليها مشي إلى مسجد إلى بيت الله حتى إذا كانت في بعض الطرق عجزت فأرسلت مولا لها إلى عبد الرحمن بن عمر ليسأله فخرجت مع المولى فسأله فقال عبد الله بن عمر مرها ولتركب ثم لتمشي من حيث عجزت. So Malik informed us that Urwa ibn Udayna said, I went out with one of my grandmothers who was obliged to walk to the house of Allah until when she had got a part of the way, she became unable to walk any further. She sent one of her slaves, or freed slaves, to Abdullah ibn Umar to ask him, and I went with him. So notice who's in charge here, the slave is. Right? And he asked him, Abdullah ibn Umar answered, tell her to mount, and then she must walk when capable from the point where she grew incapable. So she's obliged to continue, basically. Just rest there and continue thereafter. قال محمد قد قال هذا قوم وأحب إلينا من هذا القول ما روي عن علي رضي الله عنه. So he said, yes, some people have said this, but we prefer the position of Sayyidina Ali. So notice this process. Sayyidina Ali says something, Ibn Umar says something. People gravitate towards A or B, or leave one of A or B. Now A or B is left, and they just say ignored, and we just leave it. Does that make sense? So Muhammad said, some people said, etc. So he says, أخبرنا شعبة بن حجاج قال عن حكم بن عتبة عن إبراهيم النخعي عن علي بن أبي طالب كرم الله وجهه أنه قال من نذر أن يحج ماشيا ثم عجز فليركب وليحج ولينحر بدنه وجاء عنه في حديث آخر يهدي هديا. وبهذا نأخذ يكون الهدي مكان المشي وهو قول أبي حنيفة والعامة من فقهاء. The same thing in the Shafi'i school. So Shu'bah ibn Hajjaj, this is the great hadith critic, narrated to us from Al-Hakam ibn Utbah, from Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, from Sayyidina Ali, may Allah ennoble his face, who said, whoever vows that he will perform the Hajj walking and then becomes incapable, let him mount, okay, I stop walking and go on a horse, perform the Hajj and sacrifice an animal, right? It is also been said, and let him make a hadith sacrifice. Imam Muhammad said, we adhere to this. The offering is in the place of walking. So you made a vow to perform Hajj or Umrah in a meritorious way, not like something weird, like I want to do it walking on nails or without eating, right? It's not an act of worship. You made this vow that this, then you're obliged to do that, and that is a verdict for Imam Abu Hanifa and our fuqaha in general. But walking all the way is not necessarily an act of worship, right? So there's going to be issues between, again, with another, the whole issue is what is an act of worship, what is not an act of worship. Okay, then it says, أخبرنا مالك أخبرنا يحيى بن سعيد قال كان علي مشي فأصابتني خاصرة فركبت حتى أتيت مكة فسألت عطاء بن أبي رباح وغيره فقالوا عليك هدي فلما قدمت المدينة سألت فأمروني أن أمشي من حيث عجزت مرة أخرى فمشيت. So it says Malik informed us from Yahya ibn Sa'id al-Ansari that he said, I was obliged to walk, but it was difficult, but I was afflicted by a pain in the side, perhaps of kidneys. I mounted to get to Mecca and then asked Ata ibn Rabah, the Mufti of Mecca, and others, and they said, you must make an offering. Then when I came to Medina, they told me to walk from that point where I had become incapable of walking, or on another occasion, so I walked. Right. So basically, they said you didn't do what you're supposed to have done, and go back and fulfill it now. Okay. My sincere apologies. I'm going to have to stop here. Inshallah, we'll continue next week, inshallah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم.